Michael, the counter-argument is that Trump is just bluffing, is getting the Europeans to spend more on the defence, and that is unambiguously needed. They have been slackers. They are villains in this regard. But how can we trust that it is just bluster? It just gets worse and worse, what it's doing to Ukraine, for instance.
Yeah, well, what's happening there is terrible. But I think Stephen's right to call it the Trump doctrine. That's exactly what it is. I mean, there's two things you've got to know to understand Trump. One is America first, and secondly, he believes the American budget is unsustainable. And in demanding the Europeans pay more for their defence, he's absolutely correct. I mean, you know, they've been freeloading on the Americans for decades, ever since the war, basically. And what he's essentially saying to all of the other pro-Western nations is, you've got to carry your weight. Don't expect the Americans to come and bail you out if you're underspending on your own defence. Now, we've got the ANZUS agreement.
Michael, I've got that. I'm not arguing about that. I've said that from the start. I'm totally for that.
Yep, true.
What I am also saying is that does not excuse absolutely destroying Ukraine, so it bargains from a position of weakness. It's bleeding the Trump, you know, what Trump has done to them, or attack, you know, saying we are NATO, what good is that? I mean, that is something else.
Well, I couldn't agree more with you on Ukraine. I mean, you know, this Zelensky to me is an international hero for what he's done. I mean, that guy's an absolute hero. He's got a small nation under the pressure from the Russians. He's done an extraordinary job to hold them at bay for 3 years, essentially with drones. So, yeah, Trump should have said, what he should have said is, we'll, of course, continue our support for the Ukraine until that's resolved. But after that, the Europeans have got to increase their expenditure on their own GDP on defence. But to leave Ukraine in the position it is now is terrible, absolutely terrible and unforgivable. So, yeah, I mean, of course, the nations are shuddering at what he's doing, but this is part of his doctrine. There are no exemptions on this, on military spending, as we're about to find out on other issues, Andrew.
I don't know if he understands what it's doing to the faith his allies have in keeping an alliance with the US and coming to its aid, as Australia has done again and again and again. Stephen, as you know, I almost never defend the poisonous Malcolm Turnbull, the former Prime Minister, but he had a point today that made Donald Trump see red. This is the point he made.
Trump does not subscribe to the same values that we have in the past shared with America. Look, he doesn't have a commitment to the international rule of law, that's obvious. Doesn't care about treaties or alliances. You know, he's got a free trade agreement with Canada and Mexico, which he entered into, by the way. He signed it. Then he's just walked away from that.
Now, Trump then hit back, posting that Malcolm Turnbull, the former Prime Minister of Australia, was always leading that wonderful country from behind. Never understood what was going on in China, nor did he have the capacity to do so. Always thought that he was a weak and ineffective leader, and obviously Australians agreed with me. Stephen, Turnbull's intervention, is that actually now going to make it even less likely that Trump is going to exempt Australia from the tariffs he said will be imposed on all steel and aluminium imports, including ours, on Wednesday?
Well, look, I think what you've got to fundamentally realise is he's attacked Canada, he's attacked Mexico, he's attacking the EU, he's attacking Australia. It's not, Australia doesn't have any more special relationship than Canada does with the US. And he has absolutely, you know, completely torn up their free trade agreement. We have a free trade agreement with the US. We have an agreement in which they are in surplus to us. And none of that matters. So when he pretends, it's really about a trade deficit, we've got a trade surplus. He is committed to making America great again under his definition, not one that economists think will long-term work. But the point that I think you made last week is he wants to make America great again, not Australia. It's all about his economic and political narrative. And we are going to be hit and buffeted with a lot of bad policy that we thought there was a consensus on over the last 25, 30 years around economic policy, that free trade was a good thing in general. And he is ripping that playbook up. But it's not just about whether Malcolm Turnbull, who actually won the argument, I don't want to be rude to Donald Trump, but Turnbull won the argument and got the exemption. I think Trump will be determined to make sure that he is seen to be the winner in this, arm wrestle. And I fear that we'll be unsuccessful next week. I hope I'm wrong. I just fear it wouldn't matter if it was Peter Dutton, and that is not being political. He wants to be seen to win this argument, irrespective of the cost.
But I don't think he understands. What I don't think he understands is America is greater for the allies it has, and not just because they've been bullied into being his allies, but they've been inspired by the American values. That is what I think is important. News poll, Michael, 55% of people now say the coalition is not ready to govern. And yet, on the other hand, 51% would still vote for it or give it their preferences. Is this poll a bit meaningless?
It is meaningless. It's a poll you very rarely see, if ever, because it has no meaning. You start with the most important poll, which is right direction, wrong direction for the country. Does the government deserve a second term in terms of, do you want the next 3 years to be like the last 3 years, yes or no? I mean, they're the more relevant polls. So I don't think this is particularly relevant. But I think it's fair to say that as Redbridge, they've got this great quote, which is that there's a large percent of the electorate who are Dutton curious. That means they'd like to think about voting for the opposition. They're still making up their minds. And so that's why I think this campaign, Andrew, is probably going to matter more than most, because tossing out a first-term government for the first time in, 90-odd years, very rare, of course. So that's why people are thinking about, they don't like to admit they're wrong. The electorate doesn't like to say we got it badly wrong in 22. That's why most governments get a second term. People say, we'll give them another go. So this is I think there is a large number of people who have not made up their mind, which is why the campaign matters. But is that poll particularly relevant, Andrew? No, it's not.
Yeah. Michael Kroger, Stephen Conroy, thank you very much to you both.